in, and then we will kick off very shortly. For those of you that are coming in, we're just waiting for a couple more moments or so for your peers to join, and then we'll kick off the webinar very shortly. But thank you for those of you that have joined. All right, I can see the numbers going up, so I'll kick things off. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rohan Hazel. I'm the Managing Director for Gift Ed. Thank you so much for joining us. I think some of you might recognize my face from the videos on the platform on Gift Ed. So it's great to see you all here live rather than over a pre-recorded video. So thank you so much for joining. Before we dive into the session, I just want to add a quick note on participation. So we would love to hear from as many of you as we can in today's session. So if you do have any questions for myself or our guest, please do just drop them into the Q&A function if you're on Zoom, or drop them into the comments section on YouTube. And we will be looking out for your thoughts as we go along. So I want to begin, first of all, by actually just thanking all of you students who have taken the time to learn on the Global Awareness Program, or GAP, as it was affectionately abbreviated to. This was obviously delivered in partnership with the World Bank and the National Universities Commission of Nigeria, and it was a real privilege for us to be able to deliver this program to you. And I hope that it delivered some value to you, right? And over the past months, we know that thousands of you have taken the time to learn and engage with the content. 6 students from across 16 universities that we're very, very pleased to have worked with. And we've been deeply impressed, really, by your curiosity, by the quality of your reflections, and of course, by how you've connected global issues to Nigeria's local realities, right? And this is really, of course, the intent of the Gift Ed platform and the learning journey that you went on. So we're very pleased to see that this was one of the outcomes. In fact, too often I would say global challenges tend to be spoken about in the language of global solutions as well, right? The UN, IMF, etc. And of course, that's important. But in truth, we do believe that meaningful change can and in fact must happen locally, must happen through individuals like yourselves that can understand how government, business, and civil society can all come together to result in some lasting and meaning change. But of course, this isn't something that we necessarily instinctively think of in our studies or in our professional, capacities. It's something we have to learn. And that's where systems thinking becomes so important, which is, of course, one of the primary educational objectives of the GAP program. It's about recognizing relationships and trade-offs and opportunities. And I have to say, I feel that you've demonstrated this mindset acutely across the duration of the program. So that's something to be very proud of. And of course, it's also very needed. The world that you are entering is changing faster than perhaps any generation before you. I'm sure you're probably tired of hearing people say this, but it is true. And the shifts in technology and climate, demographics, geopolitical complexity, all of this is going to feed into some macro change. And your generation, at least, is what I and my colleagues at Gift Ed call Generation 2050. You are inheriting the maturation of many global issues that decision-making today has resulted in, right? So how are you going to be prepared? How are you going to build the habits of questioning, being curious, and responding to many of these challenges? So today we wanted to take a moment to connect many of these ideas, these theoretical ideas, back to practice, and to explore how ideas can, of course, become impact. And to help us reflect on this transition, I'm extremely pleased to welcome Ms. Ojoma Ochai, who's the managing partner of the Creative Economy practice at CC Hub. So her work focuses on using innovation and technology to catalyze Africa's creative economy. This spans research, advocacy, ecosystem development, and of course, investment readiness. She's also the co-founder of Pixel Ray Studios, and she sits on the board of B Trust, which was founded by Jay-Z and Jack Dorsey to support Bitcoin development in Africa. And she serves on UNESCO's Global Expert Panel on Cultural Expressions, as well as chairing African Tech and Creative Group. So she brings 17 years of experience across Africa and the Caribbean, including with the British Council, the World Bank, and several governments. So she brings, as I mentioned earlier, this powerful stakeholder, multi-stakeholder approach, cross-sectoral, but importantly angled toward innovation and future-ready thinking. So it's a real pleasure to have you here with us today, Ojoma. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's very good to be here. Thank you to the Gifted team for inviting me, and thanks to all of you who have joined. Um, I'll speak for maybe 10 minutes. I'll tell you a little bit about my work, and then um, I suppose a distillation of what I've learned in almost 20 years of working and now sitting at this intersection of technology, creativity, working with a range of stakeholders. So a little bit about CC Hub. We support the innovation and creative ecosystems, and we do this by running a bunch of programs from accelerators to incubators to venture studios. We invest as well in companies working in tech and the creative industries. We work across 44 countries in Africa. We have physical spaces in 5, in Nigeria, in Kenya, Namibia, Rwanda, and Togo. And across all the work that we do, I'm very clear that there is a lot of talent dispersed both across Nigeria and across Africa. What is not as dispersed is the opportunity. So I'm really pleased that you on the call have had the chance to start to think about some of these big issues that we try and tackle through our work. I've titled my opening comments as you don't need to have it all figured out. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. When I was you guys' age, assuming what your ages are, if someone had asked me what I'd be doing in 20 years, I would definitely not have said this. Because first of all, in terms of my educational pathway, I started out in chemistry. And then I thought, actually, chemistry is not for me. And then I went and did computer and network engineering. I worked in tech for a few years and I thought, let me do something else. And I went and did arts management and specialized in creative economy policy. And then came back to working in creative industries and then tech. And now the company that I run supports both technology entrepreneurs and creative entrepreneurs. So I'm certainly at the intersection of science, technology, the arts, innovation. But it wasn't a grand plan. It wasn't as though I sat down one day when I was 22 and said to myself, in 20 years, this is what you're going to be doing. I think it was more around, at every point I found myself trying to be excellent. And as I went further in my journey, was just more and more of that conviction that even though I didn't know where I was going, where I was, the one thing I wanted to be known for was that I was excellent at my work, at the outputs I was delivering. But in addition to that excellence was a curiosity, which I think Rohan had mentioned. And I think those were the two ingredients, really. It was being excellent where I was at any given time, but also being curious about the world around me and being open to seeing where my skills might meet opportunity. So the way that I transitioned, for example, from technology to the creative industries was, and I know many of you on the call are not old enough to remember this, but in 99, when we switched back from military rule to civilian rule, it was around that time that the first Nollywood film came out. And it was around that time that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie had just written Purple Hibiscus. And it just felt to me as though there was something happening in this arts world and creative sector that made me really curious. And I started to do research. And I thought to myself, I'm not enjoying tech. If I want to do something else, let me see if I can get into this new art sector that everybody seems to be talking about. And I knew I couldn't write, I couldn't act, I couldn't sing. And so we did a lot of research to see where my skills contribute. And so I started to get into this practice of the sort of project management side of the art. And that's how I got into arts management. And so I say all of this to say, excellence sort of opens doors, but curiosity keeps them open and it's like a pathway to new opportunities. And the final character that I think is critical for your journeys is humility. Humility helps you accept that there's more to impact and more to life and more to development that you're already doing. And when you combine it with your excellence and your curiosity, it then helps you to want to learn more so that you can follow that journey. And I think if you ask me what's my competitive advantage is I don't assume I know everything. And so it allows me to ask questions, which allows me to see patterns that often other people miss. I ask questions that other people are too proud to ask. And I connect the dots because I can ask the questions. I don't mind looking stupid because I know that there are lots of things that I do know. And so I'm comfortable admitting the things that I don't know. And I think for your generation, as Rohan calls it, Generation 2050, I think there's even more of an imperative for you to be open and humble in that way because the lines between disciplines are disappearing. Finance and storytelling, culture and code, all these things are now intersecting. So I'll end this first segment by saying, as you step into the world, you finish your studies, you've had the opportunity to do programs like this, be excellent. I cannot overemphasize. Don't be entitled. Don't be afraid to explore. Don't rush to lock yourself into one definition of success. And when in doubt, just focus on doing the thing that you're currently doing very well. I'll pause here because I know some of you will have questions and Rohan probably has some questions for me, but it's very good to be here.
Ojoma, that was an absolutely spectacular opening. Thank you so much for the pearls of wisdom that you've shared. I think I really enjoyed that once the door is open, curiosity is going to be the thing that takes you through it and opens successive doors after that, right? Starting, of course, with excellence. I resonate deeply with a lot of what you said, actually. One of the things I would like to draw your attention or the audience's attention to is a comment you made about entitlement. I think that that's extremely important in this day and age, not to be entitled. And I think this is actually probably quite a sensitive topic and worth a longer exploration of. And it occurs with every generation, right? But the entitlement to a certain way of living or a certain standard of life or access to certain goods and services, I think is inherent in all of us, right? But as you said, complex world where by 2050 things are going to be different. What we are entitled to is going to be very different from what future generations are entitled to, or indeed people in different parts of the world faced by different sets of challenges than our own, right? How do we compare to them and hold them in our mind when we are going about our own life and thinking about our own progress, you know?
Absolutely.
So let me move on to the first question, Ojoma, and I can see that we have some participants submitting questions, and I'll bring them up as we move along, right? So after your excellent reflection, your opening there, you told us about your journey a little bit. And of course, the students have spent the past few months learning with the platform on some of these big topics, these big issues, climate change, demographic shifts, geopolitical complexity, right? When you think about your own path, what helped you recognize that you could actually, your passions at least, could make an impact, could convert from curiosity and excellence in your field to delivering impacts to others as well, right? Turning these ideas into impact.
Thank you for that question, Rohan. So it was a journey. It still is a journey, I think. And it started, I think, with paying attention. And paying attention to the world around me, but also paying attention to myself and the things I was thinking and feeling as I was going through sort of different aspects of my life's journey. And so I think from my experience that you shouldn't underestimate the impact of your lived experience in shaping the things that you care about. So, from my perspective, I talk about the arts and my interest in the arts. The reason I was so exposed to that and so conscious of that is because my father is a theater arts professor. And so I was around artistic types. And so when I was reflecting on their work and reflecting on the things that they were interested in, i.e., film, i.e., books, and so on, I started to see it as an area that I was interested in, even though I wasn't a creative type myself. I thought, these guys have lots of problems, particularly around having money. And I tried to understand, like, why do they never have any money? And I figured they're just not organized. And I thought, actually, I'm fairly organized. So is there a role here for the skill set that I have? But it came from paying attention to what was going on around me. And if you look at the work that I do with innovators, with creatives, when you ask any founder their origin story, how did you get into the business? More often than not, it's based on something that happened in their life. But if you're not paying attention and you're not thoughtful about where you are at any given time, you miss those opportunities. So I would say what helped me recognize those strengths was paying attention. Um, and then once I caught on to a thought, it was then researching to understand more deeply why are things the way they are, and why is it that these guys never have any money, and why are they not organized, and what's the way to make them organized. And I realized it's a different skill set and one that I perhaps had. So I'd say it's a journey of what I just described.
Could you speak a little bit about this skill set, right? Because I greatly admire, I've had the privilege of interviewing many of the experts on our platform, and I greatly admire many of them, I think, who have the same skill set, right? And it almost feels a little intangible. So maybe it's an unfair question, but could you put words, a little few more words to what that skill set is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you're right, it's a bit intangible. But I think, and at the risk of repeating myself, I think the first skill set is just a desire to do a great job. And that's not a real skill set. It's just maybe I don't know if it's a personality, but it's a characteristic that you have to have. Because I don't think anyone succeeds by doing half-baked of anything. And unfortunately, majority of the people on the call, majority of the people in the world will be satisfied with average because they're not prepared to go the extra mile. That's just statistically, that's just how it is. But I think the first characteristic in changing the world and making impact is taking a personal ownership of doing a good job. I think that's the first thing. I think in terms of hard skills, one hard skill I would say is research. There's so much out there to learn and know that if you're not curious and if you don't have strong research skills to try and understand why are things the way they are and not be satisfied with the symptoms of anything and going deeper into like why. There's a theory around the five whys, and check it out for those on the call. If there's a situation, if you ask why five times, so why is the sky blue? Because of all the gases and things. Why are those gases there? So when you ask why five times, you get to the root of why things are the way they are. So I think research skills, curiosity are a very key thing. I think also another skill I'll say is the skill of synthesis. And synthesis is essentially taking unrelated ideas and connecting the dots in your head and for other people. So you see an opportunity there and you see a problem here, and you somehow, because you sit with the thought long enough, you connect the dots and think about how those two things relate to each other, or how something here can solve something here. So I think that's another key skill that you need for impact. So for example, we do a lot of work with creative entrepreneurs. And one of the things we're trying to do is attract more capital to the creative sector. And I figured that there isn't a lot of money lying around for creative projects for various reasons, which we don't have time to go into. But there's a lot of money relatively to creative industries for social impact. And yet we know that creative activity leads to social impact, whether it is jobs or whether it is social cohesion or whether it is inclusion. And so I started to think a lot about how might we go to where the money is for social impact and get some of that for the creative industries. And started to think about how do we paint that picture for the people funding social impact. And over a period at CC Hub, we now have quite a large program that's looking at how film, television, and social media content makers can contribute to promoting gender equality with funding that only says gender equality. So the funder, the Gates Foundation, they don't fund creative industries. They're not there to fund creative industries. They're funding gender equality. But by synthesizing and saying these two things can relate to each other, one is able to then make the connection. So I think that's another skill, is the skill of synthesis. I don't know how you learn it. I think it takes practice. And I talk about thinking a lot, but there's no other way to say it. And this is going to be controversial, but if you're always on your phone and you're always watching television and you're always bombarded with external influence, then you don't have time to think a lot. And so personally, I do spend a lot of time with no external interference because then that's when the thinking happens. You can't make impacts without being thoughtful and some of these things I talked about already. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer.
That was wonderful. And truthfully, I really have to say that I resonate with so much of what you've just shared there. I think curiosity being the engine, and I think curiosity does underlie many of the other points, the skills that you raised, right? Talking about synthesis, you have to have that passion and drive in order to be able to even identify the different components of a system. And then that next step, it takes effort, it takes thinking to then draw the connections between those things and then be able to communicate and understand the outcome, right? And internalize it. So you're not just repeating something, but you're actually
Mm.
generating your own original thinking on something. And I believe that in the modern day, to your final point about tech, generating original thinking is extremely challenging, actually. It's all
Yeah.
too easy to parrot. Um,
Yeah. If I may just
Please.
make a point, Rohan, on that. In the world of generative AI, just to say, if you're applying for a job or you're applying for an opportunity, we can tell. The person reviewing can tell when you've just used AI, and it doesn't do you any favors. And more than ever, it's important that people have original thought. That's not to say don't use AI tools. I use AI tools a lot in my work, but it doesn't replace my thinking. And so I would say that's another skill that people are going to have to learn in time because this generation that are growing up on AI have to make the extra effort to have their own original thoughts so that you don't become one of 50 people who have asked AI the same question and AI has generated the same thing. I remember I was recruiting recently for a monitoring and evaluation lead for a role. And one of the questions we asked was a generic question around what's motivating you to take this role. Dozens of people had the exact same answer. And you could
mm,
tell that they had just typed it in ChatGPT and just copied and pasted what ChatGPT said. And I didn't spend, I mean, people reviewing applications and things are busy. I didn't spend any more time. And it was a trick question. We put in that question for that reason. So that was the first answer I went to read. And once it was the same as everybody else, it was just delete. And then there's somebody somewhere praying that the application has gone through, whereas it has not been read because you've done a lazy job of just asking ChatGPT what's the answer to this question. But yeah, that's one example of a practical way that lack of original thought makes people miss out on opportunities.
yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think we're going to see more and more of this emerging over the coming years, right? As AI tools become mainstreamed, there is obviously going to be some shift in terms of our intellectual capacity to engage with new concepts and retain knowledge. That's kind of less important now. Therefore, our ability to reason and come up with new ideas and thinking becomes even more valuable, right? And on that topic, actually, because that is really, you raised a point earlier, how do you train this, right? that's why GiftEd was set up. That's our sort of mission, is to try and build systems thinking in anyone that we work with, right? Be able to draw the connections between these dots. And so one of the, or a big component of the topics on the platform that the students learned was kind of around the web of potential crises. I don't want to get too negative, so potential crises that are going to, shape the coming years, right? Environmental issues, social injustice, economic cyclical pressures and geopolitical complexity, all of this, even violence, right? So when everything feels urgent, how do you personally decide what to focus on, right? I know the space you're in demands your attention in a lot of different spaces, right? A lot of different, development channels, but also at different stages of a business and growth, but also, creative thinking, practical thinking. There's many different urgencies to tackle, right? So from a high level, what do you choose to focus on? I mean, you shared with us earlier that you already did that. That was a defining moment for you when you mapped these two elements of social impact and creativity and the creative economy and marry them together, right? So how do you do that now? How do you repeat that behavior?
That's a very good question. I think there's maybe two high-level things. One is I'm very, very, very comfortable with the notion that there are good things that I do not do. And I think that's the first step in learning to focus. Because lack of focus often comes from, oh, there's a problem and there's a problem and there's a problem and there's a problem and I must solve them all. I don't have that. And so I think it's a discipline that if you want to make deep depth, if you want to achieve depth of impact at a systems level, you have to be fine with the idea that there are good things that you do not do. Because solving problems in our continent requires depth. There's no problem that has one cause. And I'll give you an example. We've just launched a program at CC Hub where we want to put 340,000 young people into gig work. So gig work is digital. We're looking at digital work that people can, or virtual work, remote work that people can do, targeting international employers, but for people living in Nigeria. And we're targeting on what we're calling digital creative skills. So those skills that require you to use the internet and use design or use even generative AI to solve problems and deliver tasks. And when we analyze the problem, there is a multiplicity of reasons why gig work has obstacles at the moment. So people don't have the skills, they don't have laptops, they don't have software, they don't have internet, they don't have, when they go to international gig work platforms, they can't get work because they don't have a portfolio. Also because there's negative perceptions about people if you're dialing in from Nigeria, and so on and so on and so on. And so that's a massive problem to solve, right? If you want to solve for that, we've taken on the challenge to solve for that. But it does mean that there are things we won't be able to do because we're focusing on that problem. We have to go deep. And we've committed to doing it for 5 years until 2030 with support from the MasterCard Foundation. But I say that to say, when I'm trying to decide on what to focus on, I look at what what problem could I solve that would have impact on a large group of people, accepting that I can't do everything, but whatever I do choose to do, I need to go into it deep. And so look at the multiple issues that are obstacles. So I would say it's that is what am I good at, first of all, but it's not everything that I'm good at that I can do. And the ones that I do, I have to go into it in depth. And I think the final point is, and this is something that I noticed a lot in Nigeria. If you're doing a program in Lagos State, there will be a million people in your ear telling you why you're not doing it in the other 35 states. And it always creates a temptation to want to do it. And my answer is always let somebody else do it. Like I'm doing the thing that I can do well. Or if you're doing a program in an urban location, people will say, oh, what about the rural locations? And that's not to say rural is bad or they shouldn't be supported, but I'm always like, there's millions of us. Other people can and should do it. So I think people who go far. They understand the scale of the problem. They're not naive to the scale of the problem, but they're able to just figure out what they're good at, what they can control, what they can make deep impact in, and focus on the depth and the complexity of the problem and are not swayed by peer pressure. Because even at my age, there's peer pressure from partners, there's peer pressure from funders, there's peer pressure from all kinds of sources. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but it's what small levers can you push that make the 80-20 principle. What's this, the 20% of efforts that I can make to unlock 80% of benefit or value? I'm paraphrasing, but that tends to be my approach. I look for the hardest things to solve that will make change for the largest group of people, and I focus on that.
Excellent. I think that was a really wonderful summary. And I was going to ask you a question from the audience actually. I think you've answered it actually. I think there are pieces in what you just said that answered some of this, but I want to pose it to you because I think that maybe this reflects what other members of the crowd are thinking. So you talked about the importance of the synthesis skill, right? So how can young people practice connecting ideas from different fields to solve local problems, especially in Nigeria? And I know that you were starting to answer that at the end, so I think it's a perfect lead into maybe paint a little bit more around how young people can connect ideas from different fields to solve local problems.
So I think there's multiple components, and you're right, I started to touch on it. First of all, a lot of people don't understand the problem they say they're trying to solve, in my experience. They don't understand the problem deeply enough. So I'd say before you even start to think about solving a problem, do you understand the problem? And that's the first step, and that's where research comes in. So if you take a problem like number of children out of school, why? Why are there um, so many children out of school? Because there are not enough schools, there are not enough teachers, their parents cannot pay. Why? Back to the five whys. Why can their parents not pay? And so you need that depth of interrogation of the problem. So I would say that's the first step is as you you know walk around in the wild, ask yourself, if you identify a problem, what is the root cause of the problem and what are all the dimensions of the problem is the first set. I think the second thing is, what are you good at? Some people are good at fundraising, some people are good at project management, some people are good at writing code, some people are good at writing plays or books. Like, what are you good at? And then I think, again, that needs to be a difficult decision because a lot of people overestimate their capacity. And if you're not honest with yourself, you think you can solve a problem that you actually are not equipped to solve. So I'd say there needs to also be that reflection and testing of what are you good at. And I believe that the most exciting and impactful work is where those two things intersect. The thing that you're good at then intersects with a problem that you deeply understand and want to solve. All of this requires research, it requires talking to people, it requires listening. And there's a bit of serendipity. I haven't mentioned that. There's a bit of serendipity that also happens, right? Which you should also open yourself to. Luck does play a role. You can be as prepared as you want, but if you don't get that one phone call, or you don't see that one job advert, or you don't see that one thing that will change your trajectory, it may make your journey longer than others. But I would say research to understand the problem, sit with yourself to deeply and truly understand what you're good at, and see where those two things intersect. And I think a final thing I'll say on this actually, maybe slightly unrelated, because of the way that Nigeria is, a lot of people are disillusioned, and rightly so. And by the way, all of this, I know there's probably somebody on the call thinking, oh, with this Fone that she's speaking, do you know what Fone is, Rohan? Fone
I
means an
don't actually.
accent.
Please educate me. Yeah.
Fone means an accent. I'm sure people think, oh, she's privileged and all of what she's saying doesn't apply to us because I'm in some university in Ilorin or Zaria or something. I went to school in Nigeria. My parents live in Abuja. I went to school in Zaria. I just did all the things that you guys are doing. And so don't get it twisted. But I say this to say, a lot of Nigerians are disillusioned. And so they don't even try. I worked in the British Council for a long time. When I joined the British Council, this was when I decided to switch to arts from tech. I saw the advert for the British Council in a newspaper, Tuesday Guardian. It doesn't happen anymore, but in my back in my day, there used to be job adverts in the Guardian every Tuesday and Thursday. And I bought the paper, I saw the ad, I applied. It took me days to apply. It was such a hard application. I applied, I did multiple interviews. It took almost a year. I got the job. I joined the British Council as an assistant in the arts team. When I left the British Council, I was regional director for arts and creative economy. I say this to say a lot of young Nigerians would not even take the first step of applying because when they see the advert, they believe, oh, there's somebody they already picked for the job. Like everything I've done in my life, it's because I saw an advert and I applied. And I think that's where serendipity comes in. But that's also where a bit of trust in the system comes in. When you were reading my bio, you talked about me being on the board of a company that was endowed by Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter and Jay-Z. I saw a tweet. Jack tweeted, I'm doing this endowment of 500 Bitcoin. Who wants to be on the board? And I responded and I filled a form and I did 6 interviews. So the thing about connecting ideas to solve local problems is also around not letting your disillusionment get in the way of what's possible for you to achieve because you think, oh, I won't apply. They've already decided, or if I don't know somebody, it's not going to happen. Those things do happen, but I think trust the process and trust the system. Some things still work.
I think that's a very, very powerful piece to close on there, and I would resonate with that. I'd like to regale you and the audience with a little study that was done around mindset and how mindset can shape serendipity, right? Things that seem serendipitous, a lot of it actually can in fact fall under our control if we approach situations with the right mindset. So there's two groups and of people that are basically told to go about doing certain tasks over a 3 hour window, which is go to a coffee shop, sit down at the coffee shop, come back to the lab, right? Very basic. The first group, they say positive things to them. They're very friendly to them. You know, they make a bit of community in the short time that they have with them and send them out. The second group, they do the opposite. They're rude. They ignore them. They tell them that they're you know, it's the wrong day and all kinds of things. They change their mood set like considerably. So what happens is the negative group goes out, they order their coffee, you know, they sit down at the table, and then they come back and they get paid and they walk out, right? The positive group goes over, they have a nice conversation with the lady behind the till, and they notice that there's a discount on, so they actually get a special deal, right? You know,
Mm.
and then they walk toward the table that you know they're going to sit down on. They notice that there's a money, some note on the floor that you know, and they pick that up, or it's on the way or something. They are more observant of things around them. They sit down, they have a lovely conversation with someone that walks by them and forms a connection, right? These things happened with much more frequency with those that had a positive mindset, you know. And the challenge, of course, is then taking control and ownership over your own mindset with regard to the challenges that you're facing, right? And that, of course, is much easier
Absolutely.
said than done. But yeah, just to add on a little bit to what you said there. Um,
Rohan, if I may, can I say a quick thing? I know we have to
please,
start
please.
rounding up. I see two questions that in my head are coming from the same place in the Q&A. And I'd like to try and answer it very
Please go
quickly.
for
So
it.
one person talks about the importance of attending programs and the value of despair because of non-implementation and asking for a platform. Another person talks about what specific job placement support or career assistance does Gifted provide for certified members like them. This is going to sound really harsh, but I think these two questions come from a place of entitlement. So somebody has gone through one step of your journey with you. There's no onus on them to go through the next stage of your journey. As a human being, you have agency and you have a responsibility for yourself. And so I would say make the best of the opportunity that you get, but stay curious to find the next opportunity. And maybe Gifted does have placement opportunities. I don't know. But in my experience, the people who you do one thing for somebody and then they want you to do 10 things. Nobody gets ahead like that. And there's no one organization that can solve it all for you. And the valley of despair that was referred to comes from you giving up because you expect that I've done the one thing, therefore the other thing must happen. That's not how it works. You get rejected, you try, you try, you try, you try, but the people that succeed are people that keep going. I don't know how many thousands of applications I've done in my life. I don't know how many rejections I've got in my life. If you fall into the valley of despair, unfortunately, like that's on you. You have to keep going. You can't do that to yourself. Life is hard. Like everything I've described is hard. It's not easy. And so I would say you're here, you have this opportunity. What you should do is take it and look for what's the next opportunity and what's the next opportunity and what's the next opportunity, and try not to fall into that valley and keep motivating yourself. And at the same time, don't expect that because one person has been this part of your journey, they will be with you for the whole of the journey. They've done their bit. The next step and the next step, the next step is up to you in different other forums. As I said, that sounds a bit harsh, but yeah, that is life.
We are a big fan of honest truths at Gifted, right? And confronting inconvenient truths as well, both about the world but about yourself too. So I appreciate that sharing there. And let me just address the crowd and say that we do have some placements. They're fairly limited to begin with, though, because we're just starting that part of the journey. To Ojoma's point, right? We have our set journey, and then we're building out a post journey so that there's a community for all of you to enter in. But that's going to take a bit of time to set up, and when it does, you will of course be the first to know. So thank you for your questions as well. And actually, Ojoma, how much time do you have? Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, I can do.
Okay, perfect. Because I think I want to build on your point just there around staying the course, right? So you've spoken about understanding a problem deeply, the root causes, around spending the time to research, around not being entitled and forging your own path, knowing what you're good at. And in fact, if I can paraphrase you, perhaps knowing what you don't know, right? And recognizing
Yeah.
that that's okay, right? And you should build those areas, but perhaps it's okay to rely on others when you don't have certain skill sets or knowledge bases. So how do you keep going? To your point there, right? How do you keep going when things don't seem to be working, right? And you continue putting your best foot forward.
How do I keep going? First of all, I think it's a recognition that nobody owes me anything. And so I don't take rejections personally. I apply for a thing. I often tell this story. I became as I mentioned, when I joined the British Council, I joined as a lowly, it was a low position as an assistant. After 2 or 3 years, my first year, I applied for another job. I became a manager. I did that for a couple of years. And then I applied for a director position after just 3 years, which was completely unhinged. Because like I was 27 or something. And I applied for this director position that I had no chance of being qualified for, at least in my head, but I applied. And I didn't get shortlisted. I didn't get an interview. Luckily for me, the position didn't get filled for 6 months. And in the British Council, if a position doesn't get filled for 6 months, the organization has to re-advertise. In that 6 months, after I did the first round of application and didn't get shortlisted, I asked why for some feedback. And I was also lucky that I got a lot of feedback around where I just didn't meet the cut. But I didn't, it wasn't personal. I didn't take it like, oh, how dare they? I'm an
Mm.
excellent performer, which I was. How dare they not gonna give me the promotion that I applied for? For 6 months, I just knuckled down. And in 6 months' time, when the job came up again, I applied again and I got shortlisted. I did the interview and I got the job. It was unprecedented that anybody in the British Council had worked for such a short time, had such little work experience, and got the job. But everybody knew I was brilliant without blowing my own horn. I just needed to fix some areas of management and leadership. I volunteered myself for things, and in 6 months, I was ready and I applied again. And I say that to illustrate that a lot of people take rejection personally, or they take their plans not working out personally, and so they don't try. And I feel like that's the secret sauce. If you don't take it personal and you see it as an opportunity to learn, at least for me, it then fuels me to figure out what do I need to learn more of. And how can I be ready the next time this opportunity comes around? I mean, the story I've given is a good example that ended on a good note. There are things where I tried, I didn't get in, you move on, and you just not take it personal. So I would say that's there's other things, of course. You need a community around you, you need family, you need hobbies that are outside of your work. There's all those other things, but at the core of it is don't take rejection personal.
Well, Ojoma, thank you so much for sharing so generously. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, actually, and what began, I think, as some questions around the world and how to innovate and how to think creatively about it and how to connect things together has actually become quite a personal conversation. And I think those are the most powerful and compelling, actually. Being able to forge the link between what is happening out there and our own personal development, for me, is one of the most critical things. My personal sense of purpose arises because I daily remind myself of that connection, and try and therefore create impact in the work I do because of that. But not to be defined by it, right? We're still human and have many aspects to our character and personality. But Ojoma, thank you
Absolutely.
so much. I know we're at time here, and I think you have to jump off. I just want to extend real gratitude to you for coming onto the call and for all of the participants as well, all of the students who joined the GAP program. Really, thank you so much for engaging with us and for becoming part of our community. As mentioned, we are building more into the GiftEd platform, and you guys will be the first to know when that happens. Please do keep in touch with us as we will with you, and we hope to work with you in the future. And best of luck with all of the next steps that you have. Ojoma, thank you again, and we can close this webinar.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all who joined, and good luck with everything you go on to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so